Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about Good Time. The kind of all-night-long journey movie, or a movie that takes place all in one night, is a long, rich cinematic tradition, and it's not one we get enough of anymore. You don't really see that, particularly with kind of crime drama type of things. You might get a Superbad or a funnier movie. The type of films that try to accomplish something in one night, particularly in New York City, feels like something that came out of the 1980s. And Good Time is definitely very influenced by 1980s cinema. You can tell that particularly with the opening credits, and the poster for Good Time is an obvious reference to After Hours. At first, when the movie's starting, I was a little like, okay guys, I don't know. But as the film went on, that kind of washes away text that looks like it's from the 80s and have the copyright symbol at the bottom of the title card and everything like that. But it also sort of takes that spirit and recontextualizes it for the modern age. You couldn't have Good Time take place in modern day Brooklyn or Queens, in the areas that they probably used to make these movies in during the 80s. You have to go to the outer boroughs. You know, the thing about New York is there's all this stuff in the boroughs that people really don't go to, that are seedier and maybe a little more dangerous and pretty much forgotten. And Good Time takes place in that kind of New York, so it's not like trying to make a New York that doesn't exist anymore, do movie New York. They're really taking advantage of a location that's no one's taking advantage of. Right when you thought you couldn't make a grimy, gritty New York crime movie, Good Time is like, well, you actually could. You just need to, like, you know, drive 10 more minutes that way. And that's one of the things that's really great about Good Time, is it understood what to do with the kind of film it wanted to make and make it in the modern era. This is very indebted to films like After Hours, like films about one night where you're trying to accomplish one thing, get the money to do whatever. I think what this film does so magnificently is it understands how to use the kind of location and the kind of situation they want to use. Also, as the character of Connie, played by Robert Pattinson, who's absolutely the kind of insane, crazy character that you probably wouldn't believe the kind of all-night kind of crazy crime binge that you'd have to go on with him was even real, but you know he makes such terrible decisions throughout it. He's going to take you on a crazy adventure that even you will just be like wincing at some of the decisions he makes throughout. Connie and his developmentally challenged brother Nick try to rob a bank in New York for $65,000. Seems like they're successful and they hide the money and everything's fine, even though, you know, a red dye thing goes off and all that stuff. But then as the cops stop them, because they do look like super suspicious, and when Connie's about to talk to them, Nick runs off, and then through the chase actually runs through a window. Connie doesn't actually know where Nick went, to be honest, because they kind of got split up throughout this whole thing, and Nick ends up going to Rikers Island, and Connie actually tries to get Nick out and uses the money they stole basically to bail him out, but needs $10,000 more, tries to use his girlfriend to do that but can't, and so he has to go on various schemes throughout the city to hopefully get his brother out of jail before anything truly terrible will happen to him on Rikers Island. The character of Connie, I think, feels, and even though he seems to suggest he's more of a dog type of person, feels like a rat that will always climb his way to the top, will always like grab at the cliff with his bare hands to kind of grab himself up and hopefully not fall down into the sewers and drown in the greasy water. He's always trying to get himself up. He's always trying to think of a new scheme, and he seems, you know, a lot of times, to be honest, he makes decisions that you're like, oh wow, that's actually really smart, and then other times you're like, wow, that's really fucking stupid. And it's this kind of scattershot mentality that doesn't make any sense. You're on your edge of your seat sometimes because you're like, oh, that's really smart. Sometimes you're like, that's terrible. I mean, I see why you did that, but that's still terrible. I mean, I get it, but awful. I mean, particularly when he hooks up with a teenage girl, mainly because his photo comes up on the TV. That's not funny, I guess, but mainly to just cover his ass and like kind of just goes with where that goes. It seems like he goes into things and just goes with them and takes advantage of them and doesn't think where they're going to lead him. You have this guy going through your whole night with you. It has a kind of crazy feeling where you're not sure whose hands you're in, and this film has that feeling throughout it. Now, I don't know these directors, Ben and Josh Safdie. Ben Safdie actually plays Nick, who does a really great performance, but what they managed to do in this, I mean, a lot of this is in close-up. It feels very personal. You're always like right with them, but it's like I never specifically knew where I was in New York. You know, I live in New York, I shoot all these videos for the most part in New York and such. Watching this film, I often would go, I feel like I know where that is, but I don't. It's like, it has this kind of generalness to the whole thing. It's almost like getting that specific isn't important. It's important that where they are in New York, and that definitely plays a part in this, but it's more about Connie, and the camera focuses in on that. It has this kind of intense propulsiveness that I don't see from a lot of crime films or films in general. A lot of that has to do with the cinematography by Sean Prince Williams. Also the music by One Tricks Point Never, I think. It's gonna say it down here, I don't know. Which actually won a music award or a soundtrack award at Cannes. At first that score, I was like, whoa, what is this? Does this really work? I didn't know how I felt about it, but it really like kind of like got me in it and kept me going, just added to the tension because it added to me going through it and through it and through it. The importance of musical scores probably is not talked about as much as it really should. How important it is to how you perceive a movie and how the flow of that movie is affected by it. And if you took a different score in this film, you would have an absolutely different experience. So moves you in such a way, and it's a really interesting synth kind of a score. Very much plays into the kind of 80s thing, but it does it in a really great way actually. What I really like about how like it just shot, and you see these beautiful kind of lights of dark New York, and especially the New York that most of us kind of just drive through when we're going to the airport or something, and just thinking about all the various lights, street lights and car lights and house lights going throughout it, and thinking about what's all in there. And it's like Connie kind of runs through it like he needs to find, and he thinks he can find something. And I think that's just like one of the things I really loved about how simple this premise is, but it just opened up so many different avenues and goes in different ways that it felt like a 90s independent quirky film, it felt like an 80s movie, but it felt like a current film, which I quite liked about it. Obviously, I think most people are going to talk about the performance of Robert Pattinson. That seems to be one of the bigger things about this movie, and frankly this movie wouldn't move and flow the way it does without him. He's just as important as the cinematography and the music. He's almost in absolutely every frame of the fucking movie, and without that kind of performance and how good he was, I don't think this film would hold up as well. You can have all these things sort of mask that. Certainly people have complained like, oh, it's too grimy and unpleasant. Maybe it's like playing up these unwanted areas and the crime within them. I think it's more just taking this one guy's perspective and kind of playing with it in kind of an interesting sort of entertaining way. And Robert Pattinson understands that in his performance. You know, this might be presented in more of an indie film, but it almost feels like it's so influenced by Hollywood films. It's the idea of where you have these independent filmmakers who want to take on these Hollywood themes because they're obviously raised on Hollywood movies, and this film definitely does that, but they're actually making it in an independent way. And Robert Pattinson is, for the most part, an actor who's most known for Hollywood productions. I'm not saying he's a lesser actor or something like that, but he's very much into that mode and he's good at doing it. It does feel a little like Al Pacino in certain places. It does feel like a character actor who's been giving his one great shot and is going to make it everything it's worth. This is probably the first time I've ever thought about Robert Pattinson as any sort of actor. Before I didn't really care, to be honest. I mean, I didn't really love him in Cosmopolis, and I know he's worked with Cronenberg and done stuff, and that's cool, but this is the first time I've really been like, holy shit, I think this guy is like really good, and I really like him in this. I thought he did a great job of making this character both charismatic and evil and icky and handsome and all these things in it that I don't think a lot of actors can show this amount of complexity. And it reminded me of late 70s, early 80s leading men more than it reminds me of leading men now, and not in a way that they're trying to call back to it. He just had such a naturalness to it. I felt like he probably could scheme me out of $20 just on the street randomly, and like, but also like do it charismatically, but also that he cares about his brother. He still has a soul underneath all those schemes and all that trickery, which I think really drives this film. You know, he's a son of a bitch, but he cares about his brother. He deeply cares about his brother. He's not just doing this to get his money back or be rich or be a better gangster. He's doing this to get his brother out of Rikers. And you can tell that all throughout it. Like, that is what he cares the most about. And he's very good at doing, you know, all of his crazy decisions while also mainly being about his brother. Jennifer Jason Leigh's barely in this movie. I know she's in a lot of the ads, but she's barely in it, and she sort of overacts. I wasn't really a fan of her. Barkhad Abadi, I believe, who is in Captain Phillips, is actually really good in this film, and you don't see him enough, unfortunately, as well as Buddy Duress, who's really good. I expect to see him in more stuff, and also Tallulah Webster, who did a really great job. Also, a lot of like charismatic actors I've never heard of. This felt like stepping into an indie world, which I don't know the Safdie brothers at all before seeing this. It felt like stepping into an indie world I wasn't accustomed to, but it felt like one that was rich and almost had its own day players that were ready to go, along with like this big movie star, Robert Pattinson, or at least celebrity. The more I think about this movie and while I was watching it, I felt very in it. And in it in a way that it took me a minute to think about it, because it felt like I had lived through this experience. What this film is so genre, it's not thinking about genre perfection, it's almost thinking about the messiness of genre. It doesn't have a nice compact ending. It moves in certain ways that are odd, and it has kind of its own flow while going through this one night adventure. It has fun with that. It has fun in its kind of genre-ness and plays in that, and it's fine with that, and I sort of love it for that. But I was so within it while it was going on. I was surprised by that. There's not a lot of films that can grab you and just grab you into them, especially one that has such an unpleasant protagonist. But I think that's actually one of the things I really like about this film, is I don't necessarily need to have a beer with every protagonist in every movie. That's not really important to me, and I think if I would with this film, it wouldn't work as well. And it shows the kind of intelligence of the filmmakers and Robert Pattinson, that they make a character that's both likable but also a piece of shit, and that's a hard thing to grasp for some audiences, it seems, and even critics, and I think they're really missing out on a lot of this film. The more I've thought about it since I saw it, the more I've liked it. The more I've thought about it as just a simple little decently, tightly, oddly kind of genre crime film, in the way that it might be a cliche to keep saying like we don't get these kind of films anymore, but I think it goes back to what cinema can really do with a crime film, a tight little nice grimy little crime film that can show you the areas of the world that you probably would never go into, and the characters you would never trust, but be propulsively stuck with them as they try to do the right thing and the honest thing for them as a person and for their own family. And this film really goes for that in a lot of ways that I don't see enough of, and when I do see, I kind of like seeing. You know, this might feel like just a cute little crime drama thing, but I feel like there's a lot more there, and this does feel like probably one of the more promising crime films, and one that I feel like I could watch after a while. It reminds me of staying up too late and then waking up the next morning and feeling, you know, unwashed, even if you had showered before, just because you feel like you're, you know, existing in a plane you shouldn't. And this film feels in that plane more than I can say for a lot of crime movies. It feels like I'm doing something wrong, that you're stuck in this area, and Robert Pattinson's character feels that way the whole time, but he's gonna figure his way out of it to get us all safe and to get his brother Nick in the right position that he should. And the music does that, the direction does that, particularly the way it's shot. It feels like you're just stuck with someone who you should never be stuck with, but going on that journey is such an amazing thing to behold, and feels like a real journey of a movie. It feels like you went on an epic journey just in a night, just along with him, and you can't believe everything you've been through throughout it. Good Time is a tense and very intimate feeling crime film that its intimacy and going through a creepy person like Connie is feels the intimate wrong way to be, but kind of the wrong way with him can put you in ways that you never expect you would. And that's probably what makes Good Time such an interesting, odd, kind of intimately crazy experience. So if you have seen Good Time and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to.